This is Duke University. As I understand it, part of the reason for coming together is to think about what exactly makes postdoctoral experiences postdoctoral, why this time is unlike graduate school, but also distinct from being on the tenure clock, and how it is that we can understand our time here as more than a way station to elsewhere. So, like Deborah said, my dissertation proposed that the legal adjudication of photography in the 19th century helped produce a central paradox of modern personhood. The expressions a person might not control became most her own, just when the click of a camera could take them. My interest in the nature and reading practices of involuntary expressions arose from the curious isolation of, quote, casual and often involuntary expressions in the first legal treatise arguing for an individual's right to privacy. Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren's 1890 Harvard Law Review article, The Right to Privacy, used these unpredictable and almost undetectable movements to reinforce the need for privacy in a new media environment filled with instantaneous cameras. Their article transformed the question of whether photographs captured, shaped, or created expressions on faces into a legal question. In this moment, the relationship between a person and her image became a matter of legal concern. That the point-and-shoot camera could surprise its subjects seemed to promise it would always catch them before they began to pose. Thus, instantaneous photography put pressure on the notion of personhood that equated self-possession with control. If the point-and-shoot could take expressions a person did not know she was making, it called into question the extent to which those expressions were ever her own, and whether expressions could reliably communicate one's self-possession in the first place. The right to privacy was, in part, a response to this photographic threat. The privacy it sought to shield did not reinforce autonomy, but rather relied on flashes and instants of its absence. It took me about 3 weeks to feel at home in Durham, and even less to know that Duke was the ideal place to reconceptualize my project. Now, in The Evidence of Things Unseen, like Deborah was saying, I construct a multidisciplinary genealogy of involuntary expression as a marker of modern personhood by thinking broadly across scientific studies, aesthetic theories, and the adjudication of personal expression in 19th century America. I argue that it was photography that played a key role in bringing the involuntary ways our faces move and bodies gesture under scientific scrutiny, and I use depictions and understandings of facial expressions to join the shifting biological study of the human with socio-legal notions of personhood to unearth the conceptual cross-pollinations between the two. The new notion of a right to privacy I propose through this historical and critical work is not restitution for violations that already occurred, but rather protection of the future potential of our expressions, which cannot be anticipated. In our contemporary conversations around the stakes of surveillance, the erosion of our everyday privacy and dignity with so many cameras watching always, this is the sense of privacy I believe we most need. But this reconceptualization of the project, this expansion of its concerns beyond the legal, would not have been possible without some productive wandering over the last 2 years. With Priscilla Wald's guidance and countless bits of wisdom from Ranji Khanna, Gabriel Rosenberg, Liz Grosz, Frances Hasso, Len Tenenhaus, and so very many others, I've been able to use my time to read broadly and write new chapters on Frederick Douglass, Emerson and Sir Charles Bell, as well as adding sections on Nathaniel Hawthorne and Edith Wharton. You'll hear the ghost of the job market asking me to be more literary in those new chapters. But while that would have been enough, and it would have been enough, I think, to have done that, there were many more experiences and projects that enriched my time here, many of which Deborah mentioned, but I'll say a couple words about each. Liz Grosz's Time and Becoming class last year was, for me, a master class not only in theories of time and being, but in pedagogical excellence. The way that Liz constructs her lectures in every class, the way that she is capacious enough in mind and body and spirit to answer anything that comes her way in succinctly, beautifully, and engaged, always engaged in whatever it is that has been asked, was inspiring beyond anything I can even say. Maybe a little bit less inspiring. I taught my own class called Imagining Slavery and Gender last semester. And like Deborah said, I curated an exhibit of the students' works that's up in East Duke right now. And part of what was particularly amazing about teaching that class in the moment of Black Lives Matter and giving the students free rein to create their own works of historical memory, which is what the class was about, was seeing the range that really they came up with. So one student was really inspired. We took 4 site visits over the course of the semester. One site visit was to the archives, to the Rubenstein, where the director of the John Hope Franklin Center had set up a bunch of different kinds of documents related to slavery, specifically North Carolina. One site visit was to the Duke Campus Farm. So the first British land grant given to a family in this part of the Piedmont was in 1752 to the Couch family, and they got to own up to 300 acres of land, I believe, in this area, and part of that land was what now is the Duke Campus Farm. The Rubenstein, luckily for my students, owns the Couch family papers. So in the Couch family papers, they were able to see documents, right, about the slaves that the Couch family owned, and then relate that to when we went to the Duke Campus Farm to actually think about what it means to be on land, right, that you sort of theoretically know was land upon which folks were enslaved, but to actually be on land that is still farmed now as the land, like, that is still farmed now and shows the vestiges of having been farmed through capitalist practices of enforced labor. And so one student was really affected by the red clay-ish soil of the Piedmont, by the fact that new soil is not being produced because of the fact that the tectonic plates underneath our feet don't actually move anymore. So the new soil isn't being produced, plus it was deprived of nutrients through the over farming during slavery, so that when Saskia, who runs the farm, dug into the soil to show the students what it is that she had to grow things out of, it's clay. It doesn't look like, fertile, rich, dark dirt. It looks like clay, because that's what it is. So she made this painting inspired by the fact that the soil is red. And she made a lovely watercolor painting. Another student is a photographer, so he took these stark photographs of milk jugs. We read Beloved in the course, and he wanted to think about the devaluation of Black motherhood. So the photographs are about the scene where Sethe is raped and her milk is stolen. And she never refers to it as having been raped, she refers to it as her milk having been stolen. So these photographs are 3 milk jugs, and then the milk jug disappears in the final frame. And there's these black and white, very stark, very arresting, very sad, very mournful images. Another student wrote a song based on the clearing in Beloved, and the lyrics in the song are partially from the text. But the song is written in the style of a spiritual, and his question in writing this song was, what can we recover from a spiritual tradition whose Christian ideology was used to reinforce enslaved mentalities? What is there to recover from this spiritual tradition, and can it actually speak to the needs of a contemporary present? So anyways, I say all that to say my students did amazing work, and it's up in East Duke now, and you should go see it. That's the short version of that. Like Deborah said, I also participated in the Basque Connections project team for Art, Vision, and the Brain under the incredible leadership of Zab Johnson and Marianne Wardle. And I was able to lead a few reading sessions last summer around the history of reading faces, and the students' project manifested both in an individual research project of their own design and choosing, and in an exhibit that's up in the Nasher now called Making Faces. And it's all about, they were really interested in the neuroscience of how we read faces, what parts of the brain are activated when we see a face, what kinds of shapes we follow in order to read or recognize a face, both in terms of recognizing it as a face and in terms of identifying that face as a particular person. And so a lot of their projects think about why and how the brain functions to make faces out of objects that aren't faces. So like an outlet is a famous example, or like the front of a car, right? Sometimes the grill of a car with the headlights looks like a face. So the exhibit is about that, and also their experiments that were neuroscience-based in method were about the reading of ambiguous faces. And a couple of students have had an explicit interest in autism. So the projects were about that. Through connecting with students in that team, I led an independent study, like Ash did, for one of our very talented students, where we read literature and thought about the plasticity of the self in social, psychological, neurological, and behavioral registers through literary works of the Harlem Renaissance. so narratives of passing, and contemporary accounts of transgender children, which she got really interested in. The student that I was working with got really interested in because of a science and culture class that she was taking with Era Wilson and a neuroscientist whose name I'm not remembering. What's that? And Tina Williams. There were the writing retreats that I was able to lead. So all of these, I'm saying all of these to say that this is part of how I cobbled together a sense of wandering amidst remaining productive in my own writing. The writing retreats was a way for me to gather with other people and write on the weekends. I am an extrovert by nature, and the solitary life of the scholar has always been a point of friction for my spirit. So having a space where I could come together with other people to write, to talk about the process of writing, and also to serve snacks was a way that I made last year a productive writing year, and the students really enjoyed it as well. The day-long symposium that Deborah mentioned, Spirit Pictures, was fantastic. We had, during the day, a photographer who specializes in 19th century techniques, led a workshop for about 30 people, and made tintypes of a few of the audience members, including we took a group photo of the 3 scholars who came to visit, the photographer and Cheryl and I, the 2 organizers. And then we had 3 senior scholars come in from Georgetown, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and University of Toronto, and gave papers around themes of spirit photography. So spirit photography enters my work by way of its being tied up in the 19th century with questions of evidence in courts, and whether or not, even at the point where often they could be proved to be fake, right? They're not actually taking photographs of spirits. There's the question of being taken nonetheless as mementos of death, and the different register of evidence that grief might need versus the law. Yes, but the highlight in all of this work has been the ability, chance, and inordinate privilege, I think, to wander. Before I indulge further in my naturally nostalgic orientation, or even more, maybe, in my naturally nostalgic orientation, I want to say also that there are very real and very material risks to inhabiting the transient time and space of postdoctoral positions. I don't want to romanticize that aspect of postdocs by romanticizing the wandering of postdocs, and I don't want to omit acknowledging that this gorgeous time at Duke has been marked by precarity, just as it has been marked by transformation and growth. After the 2008 global economic recession, these positions have often become crucial to making one's way to a tenure-track position. But what that means is that the career path from Ph.D. to associate professor is that much more protracted, often geographically disjointed, and profoundly and precisely uncertain. Yet, because of this, it becomes even more important for institutions like Duke to build robust postdoctoral programs, especially those that nurture scholars whose voices and work challenge the academy that exists to become the academy our students and changing world need. And we've seen examples of exactly that kind of work today. I mention this context in order to acknowledge the structural, historical, and institutional pressure under which programs like the Provost Postdoctoral Fellowship exist. It is under pressure both to be justified and to be able to tally what success means, that quantifying the value of these programs becomes important. Paradoxically, or if you're familiar with the way the best scholarship thrives completely logically, the ability to wander from book to book, thought to thought, conversation to conversation, and beyond the research proposal and research plan has been, without a doubt, without question, the most fruitful work of the last 2 years. It's this wandering that is difficult to quantify in an end-of-the-year report and to justify. But it's, I think, crucial that we do so anyway. And it's what has so marked my experience at Duke and what has been most distinct and important to me about this postdoctoral time. So, thank you.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.